We have something called autopilot, which is no longer relevant in today's world. It existed in conditions where things were stable and predictable. Today is not those days. For example, you'd go to university, college, whatever the post-secondary is, and you'd come out with something that you think would be relevant. That's no longer the case. You come out now and everything's irrelevant. You might have a career ladder. There is no ladder because AI is disrupting. And unless you're head down and not paying attention to what's going on in the world, then you are more than likely to be disrupted by the assumption that there is, in fact, a ladder and some sort of linear progression from where we were to where we are now to where we're going. So autopilot then is what Daniel Kahneman calls part of system one, and in that he includes intuition. It's not Intuition is a cognitive process. It's part of it. And so if you understand that, then you can work with it intentionally and consciously. Let's just look at what it's all about. Volatility. In a context of volatility, which we are in now, any kind of autopilot equals a liability. It's a real risk because the assumption is everything's the same, nothing's changed. It's changed quite radically, as I mentioned. So what intuition does for you, which is a cognitive process, by the way, it's not a mystical power, it's a cognitive process, and it works with high-speed data, working at phenomenal speeds because it's run through your subconscious, and I'll cover that in some coursework later. But it's based on pattern recognition. So it's fast, it overrides anything outdated because it's standing in the current, it's standing in the now. And it can be updated at any time. It's flexible, so it's not stiff and rigid and not stuck in cognitive certainty, but is open to cognitive uncertainty, which is why intuition works really well in radically challenging and volatile environments. It's also grounded in sensing. And sensing, in this case, meaning picking up signals and cues. So signals that tell you things, the pattern isn't the same. There's a different pattern. Lots of great stories about this. One of the ones that was most famous is the fire story where these men were on the floor. They were fighting the fire. He walks on and says, "Clear the room now." And the minute the last person came off the floor, the whole thing collapsed. What they were standing on collapsed because the fire wasn't where they thought it was. It was underneath them. So that's because he understood and recognized instantly, but not necessarily consciously, he understood that this pattern was not following the norm. That's what intuition is all about. It's pre-cognizant knowing. And that means that if by the time it gets to your head, it's too late. So, you know, it's pre-cognizant, meaning as soon as you have that instinct, you are on track. So that's why it's a very nuanced skill set. It's a very nuanced attribute that we each have to a greater or lesser extent, in the sense that we may or may not be listening to it. Okay, so it's based on pattern recognition. And what I'd like to do now is make the case for expanding consciousness around and with intuition being the fulcrum. Autopilot worked before because it was based on the past. We could always say, well, this has been proven. You know, follow whatever we've done before. It's a linear thing, and with the past being here, the present being here, and the future being here. So we know this has been. Avoid change because it equals risk. Well, right now, if you don't change, you're in a very risky position. It worked before, meaning we are going to make the assumption that whatever happened before is going to happen again. I wouldn't make that assumption. That's really high risk. Follow the herd. That's assuming we know where the herd is going, and I wouldn't make that assumption either. So those autopilot assumptions then are the ones that are getting challenged in today's world. Consciousness, shifting into a consciousness, brings your curiosity back online. Sorry about the siren. Maybe this is appropriate in a way. Consciousness goes back to queries. So if we look at work before, the question is, what's the difference between where we've been and where we are now? In other words, you have to take a look at the context and get a sense of that. The second question that follows the herd, where do I end up if I keep following the herd? Am I going to end up in the past, or am I going to end up obsolete? It's asking that question, because in that uncertainty is some knowing that allows you to make better decisions overall. And the third one, which follows the avoid change because change equals risk, is what's the cost risk of doing nothing, of maintaining the status quo, pretending there's no change, denial, being a river in Egypt and all of that. But that idea that nothing's ever changed, or nothing does or has changed. So the case then for expanded consciousness is to shift out of these old patterns and habits and move into a much more aware zone where we're understanding what's going on in the world, how we're processing information, how we're thinking about the information that we're processing, and what it is you actually trust versus not trust. So it's a case for conscious intuition, where you have speed, it's not rigid, it's not you have speed, it's not rigid, it's flexible. So speed, flexibility. You get signal detection. You can sense patterns like in today's world, so real time. Adaptive decision making. You get to change and rewrite and shift as you go. So that's a tremendous opportunity to be, to make those decisions and choices that fit the now. Adaptive decision making is changing your decision making from linear, which is this line that assumes past, present, future. And that's had enormous cost ecologically and socially, because it's what I call direct line thinking. If this, then that. It's just causal. Doesn't consider the ecological or relational, societal health, personal health. It doesn't consider any of those things because it's not thinking about that. Linear thinking does not embrace relationships. And so adaptive decision making then is about how do we adapt the decisions so that we consider relationships and go for wider health. So I would think about it as systemic health, wider health all around. And that puts you into the territory not only of resilience, but also discernment. And I'm going to distinguish discernment from snap judgment, where snap judgments are just a fear-based response to sort people, put them in piles. And of course, in polarization environments, it's really easy to hear that all the time. You're this or you're that. It's the duality of perception versus understanding that if you dig deeper, you're going to get some real insight into what's going on, why it's going on, for who and how, and all of that. So resilience then is your payback, but it's bigger than your resilience. It's also being able to navigate tremendous environments of tremendous uncertainty and volatility. We're in that. And it allows you to really make those, not just pivots, that's a sort of a tweak, but to make those jumps where you trust much more deeply in what you're getting than you would if you were just trying to follow the path and stick with that. So my name is Dawna Jones, and what I'm going to do right now is just quickly leave you with something to do with this. And that is that intuition quite frequently is assumed to be not something you do. You don't trust it, or it hasn't worked for me before. It's not fail-proof. But I have met pilots from trained to fly in Vietnam, where if they got shot at, or if they were in trouble, they dropped the chopper, and so the enemy couldn't get it. And they have been flying in really tough environments like Kauai, where perception is extremely difficult, and they have not followed that training, and it's been automatic. So that was a really interesting conversation decades ago that I had there. But the point being that training did not override an intuitive strike, and the intuition was there. So look for things in yourself where you sense and how you sense your inner knowing before it turns into consciousness. And that's a great place to start. There'll be more on this. If you like this, subscribe, hit like, please. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.